how was everybody's weekend?
I went to the pumpkin patch in Perkins and 10 out of 10. It's huge.
In Perkins?
Yeah.
Really? In Perkins.
It's like, well, I don't know, but it's called
Crazy.
I have no idea
Is it
where I
carrots?
was.
It's not carrots.
Raider or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
Something like that pumpkin patch. I mean, it was like one of the only pumpkin patches around here.
Yeah.
And you drive around it, people, like it's huge. I've
Really?
never seen such a big
Do
pumpkin
they,
patch.
I assume they sell pumpkins there?
Yeah.
Are there
Yeah.
any
You
green
drive
ones?
around and you pick out your pumpkin, like you stop. and
Are you
pick
one
out-
of the big green ones?
Well, my mom really wants a green one.
Yes,
Okay.
there's big
Okay.
green ones all over.
Perfect, I'm going there.
Yeah.
Are there a lot of people?
There was like, not a lot, but not a little bit. But you were so spaced out, I wasn't close to anybody and I had to take a picture with the self-timer.
I did take a picture with this all the time.
So maybe instead of meeting here for class on Thursday?
I agree.
Great idea.
10 out of 10.
I agree.
It was so fun. You could like
All
stop and then
opposed?
run around and look at the pumpkins and then get back in the AC. It was hot on some days.
No, this would be a good week.
Yeah.
Actually, a nice week. Anybody else have any good news to share from the weekend? None.
I set up a plan to go see Seaboard's Food in Diamond.
Yeah, so did they offer you the job? or-
They're gonna give me a tour of the place and then meet me, and then they'll give me an offer or say we didn't like you at the end of it.
Have fun on that tour.
Yeah,
You have to go to like you shower. It's like community showers
really.
when you go in on the pig farm. Yeah.
Right on.
That's pretty cool. When do you go?
The 29th.
That's awesome. Are you excited?
So yeah.
Very cool. That's really good news. How nice will that be to like already know you've got a job lined up?
That would be pretty nice.
Yeah. Anybody else have good news to share?
That's my Odette this morning.
How was that?
Got it over with. I think it was good.
Good. How long does it take all to get results back?
Like until the end of November. My date, like it has a certain date. I think it's November 28th that they come out.
Oh my gosh. So in Florida, when I got, like, did all my teacher certification tests, you walked out that day knowing what your scores were.
That would be really nice.
And they give you a printout with your scores. And I mean, of course, it took a couple weeks to get it mailed, like officially, for you to be able to send that to places to apply. But you got a printout that said, here's your score.
Mama just needs to do better.
Well, there's everything's multiple choice except one essay question, and so they could at least tell me how I did on the multiple choice part. I feel like, but
Right.
nope.
Well, today our discussion is going to center around hunger. So, you know, this whole month is about domestic food security. And we've started off, you know, a lot kind of tackling what exactly are food benefit programs. And so last week y'all watched, I think, A Place at the Table that kind of looked specifically at more current issues related to food insecurity as a whole and programs like SNAP. And we kind of talked about how watching that film maybe debunked a couple myths or misconceptions that we had about people who were on SNAP benefits. But this documentary that y'all watched, Hunger in America, is from 1968. So we do know that some of the statistics are outdated, but a lot of the same information and principles remain. And it focused specifically on the idea of hunger. What were some of, I've read through and looked through some of y'all's reflection papers, so I kind of have a gist of your reactions, but class as a whole, what was it like to watch that documentary?
I started crying from like the very beginning with the old baby.
Yeah, why? Why did it make you cry?
Just knowing that the poor baby didn't get any food.
Other reactions?
I was dumb enough to sit down and try eating while watching that.
Oh,
Oh, did not eat dinner that night.
really?
Yeah, that was like two, like it opened up with the baby and I was like, okay, like I could probably get through. And then as a, no. Like gave dinner to my dog and was like, okay.
Other thoughts?
The part about the, I think they were, yeah, in Loudoun County, where the mom had like several kids running around and she had like a year-old baby and then like a 2-week-old baby, and she fed the like year-old table scraps, like whatever they would have left off the table, like gravy was what she had for breakfast.
Gravy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's just, it was awful.
Very sad.
That and then San Antonio, the whole, I don't remember his political, like where he stood like political wise, but like the fact that he was like, well, if they're gonna starve, sorry about their education, sorry if they're hunger, like goes back on the plot. Like I was like, that doesn't mean anything. Like that's a poor child.
One of my questions. I feel like there's just so many things that even if we were like to talk about the documentary place by place, there's a lot of the principles that overlap each other. And so I'm not really sure the best way to go about having the discussion other than just kind of taking some of y'all's thoughts and let's dive into it and let's see where it goes. So yeah, that politician was definitely one of my personal least favorite
Yeah,
parts of the whole
Yeah.
film.
He had like zero sympathy for anybody, is what I took from it. Like he was like, okay, that's their problem.
Like you're not in my class, like money range class. So other than that, if you're less than sorry about your luck, like go find a job. Like
He's doing fine, so that's all that matters.
So one of the things, and I wrote it down, that he said in there is like, it's not my fault that the daddies won't work.
Yeah.
yeah.
And then the person interviewing him kept pressing, but is that the child's fault? And what about the children? Well, parents should care more. Like, again, it kind of goes back to that idea of like, is this an individual problem or is it a collective problem? I think we could definitely say his stance was very much, this is individual responsibility, individual problem. Don't pull me into this. And then they said, well, we know if students are hungry, they can't learn. And we know that from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? If physiological needs aren't met, how can we expect people to be motivated to do anything? Go to school, work, what have you. And he says, well, if they can't eat, it's not our problem. Is it our problem or is it the father's problem? What do y'all think? When people are hungry, whose problem is it?
I think when we become aware, it becomes our problem. Like, we don't necessarily have to be the ones that like directly feed them, but I think it's like social responsibility to take action.
And where he was sitting, like political wise, I think that was like
He was-
our problem. You know what
He
I'm
was the
saying?
county
Like,
commissioner, so he could definitely do something about that.
I think it's interesting how he had a lack of caring, like complete indifference to half of the population he served, just in San Antonio.
that, and he was elected what, 5 years in a row? Like, I don't know.
Just like no one drove on that side of town.
Yeah.
One of his biggest arguments that he said is, well, we're always going to have people on the bottom and people on the top. It was like to him, that is a way of life. That's just how like society always functions. He uses the phrase, I personally don't like using it because I think it's culturally insensitive, but there's always going to be chiefs and Indians, right? We've got, and he kind of said, and he did, I wrote down the quote, we always will have to have Indians and chiefs. What are y'all's thoughts about that and that view of society?
I think it was just, and he said, if you don't have hunger, you won't have Indians and chiefs. So I wrote it down too. And I just wrote, he's way more interested in his own power than helping other people. That's all, it seems like it's all he cares about. From that perspective, honestly, from a human perspective, I don't think that really is all he cares about, but I think there's some stubbornness there that's like making it seem like he doesn't care about people at all.
Some other thoughts?
And that's, the other side of that is like the guy, the second farmer that they interviewed, he was like, yeah, we are poor and we're proud of it, like, we don't need your help. And if God wanted, or God helps people that helps themselves, so he's not looking for handouts, so they don't want help.
Oh, let's go off of that phrase too. God helps people who help themselves. Do y'all think that's true?
I think so. If you're not willing to help yourself, how can you expect anyone else to be able to help you?
What are some implications of that?
What about if you're put into a situation where it's not your control at all though? So like, they want to help themselves, but they physically or feasibly can't.
But it's like saying helping yourself, is that truly turning away help because you are helping yourself? Does that make sense?
Well, and from a biblical standpoint, that's saying God only blesses those people who he deems right. And I don't know. It's called prosperity gospel. That can be a thing.
I do have a question, and this is
Yeah.
kind of off. Why are they having so many kids?
Yeah.
That was my thing. The one in Alabama, she had 10 kids already, could hardly feed them, was starving herself and ended up starving her baby. Why are we having more kids?
So they talk about that.
Yeah, they
Anyone
said
remember?
like you would help the problem for a little bit, having kids.
They said it was like an outlet for creativity. Like
Yeah.
that's the only thing they can
I
do.
did, but like
for fun, I guess.
mentally, like I don't think I could, like knowing that I could hardly provide for 10 kids.
I don't think you can say that because you're not in that situation. Like, it's like a creative out, like they can do nothing else except reproduce, basically.
That's the other thing, my grandpa was one of 12 kids, and he said that every kid had a job on the farm.
Yeah.
Like, so that's another reason that there's free labor for farmers.
And my grandparents were the same way. Like, my grandpa was one of 8.
Same.
Well,
Yeah.
one thing you have to keep in mind is when you are consistently in a mode of survival, contraceptive things are not going to be on your mind. Drinking more than 2 glasses of wine and becoming dependent on alcohol is not going to be on your mind. When you're in constant survival mode, it has to be talked about. It does chemically change the way that your brain works. You are constantly in defense, and finding those little things that can alleviate just anything for a second, it can mean that much more to that person. And when you're constantly in these situations and you get judged for it, it does nothing more than incentivize you that you're against me and nobody wants to help me. That's really what it does. So when we think about these situations and we think about, well, why are these humans acting this way, they're in survival mode. They're not in the mental state that we have the privilege to be in. You know, we get to be here, we get to participate in higher education. Some people, they can never attain what you're attaining right now. So trying to compare different human mental states, you have to keep in mind, like, poverty does change mental state for people. So your decision makings, they might not be reasonable. They might be crazy to everybody else, but to you, that's your human nature. So it's just part of, individual blame or system blame. I'm trying to find that middle ground. But it's a big gray area, and it's hard to talk about, because it's also hard to talk about something that you don't come from. And a lot of us don't come from that. I don't come from that, but my best friend growing up does. And many of my best friends growing up do. So you just, keep in mind when you putting thoughts to other people's perspectives that their mental state, it doesn't equal out. Just keep that in mind.
One thing that I talked about that I thought was really interesting, and a lot of research since 1968 has continued to support this idea of when you are in poverty or in that constant fight or flight mode, a lot of times those people, when you talk to them about what do you have to be hopeful for? What are you looking forward to in the future? What's the prospect of life getting better for you? They don't see it. And so because of that, because they can't see the long-term payoff of whatever that work is they're doing at the time, all they know to focus on are short-term things, right? Again, this is all tying back into motivation and what we know about intrinsic, extrinsic, and which pays off. And all of that. But again, because they can't see the long-term benefits of stuff, they become very short-term minded. And so because they can't see that, oh, there's gonna be light at the end of this tunnel and I will be able to enjoy something, I can only enjoy what I can enjoy now. And so I remember us having that conversation at the beginning of the month of, well, why do they spend money on this? You know, if they are in poverty and don't have food, why do they have a nice TV? Or why do they have the newest cell phone or a car? Because those are short-term enjoyments they can have because they don't see a long-term way out of the poverty they're in. Any of y'all watch the show Schitt's Creek? Okay, so I just watched an episode that was like the perfect example of this. It's during season 2. If you haven't watched it, kind of the premise of it is this like super rich billionaire family gets all their money taken away. The only thing they have left is this like shitty town they bought called Schitt's Creek. And that's where they have to move. They live in a motel, literally have no money. So they've gone over a year without any income, living in a motel. And the son, for the first time he works at this like clothing store, anyways, ends up getting a check for $40,000. It's like the first income anyone in their family's had in a year. And the mom is like already like, we need to go on a trip. And the daughter's like, oh my gosh, we need to celebrate a check, da da da. And he's like holding them and he goes, I think we should probably, what's the word? Save this? And it made me think about some of the stuff we're going to talk about today. And that, like, here even were these people who had money, but because they had been in what seemed like a long-term poverty situation, they had already adapted to that short-term mindset of, well, if we have money now, it's not going to last long-term, so I better enjoy it right now here in this moment that I have it. And so I thought it was interesting that they pointed that out because that's been, again, consistent behavior that we have seen in research that happens when people are in poverty or when they're hungry. And it is. It's sad. It's, again, it's hard to get out of that cycle of poverty and hunger. So how do we help people shift from that short-term mindset to a long-term mindset?
I think a lot about like my grandparents, my grandma, and even my dad when they were in situations because none of them, they would always say we were poor, but we had enough. And so my grandma, she had 13 siblings and her husband had one other and he worked for everything and she was a beautician, but they had 3 kids and they didn't know how to feed them. And so they just continuously kept working for their money. And she's like, well, I don't know how long we're going to survive. And my grandpa was always like, we just keep working. And I think once you have somebody on your side who continuously keeps telling you that it's okay, that's how you can get out of the mindset. Because a lot of these people, both of them are just telling each other that they can't make it through and it's short term. But once you have one person telling you that it's going to be okay, I think that's kind of how you can shift it a little bit.
I think the other question I have with that too is like kind of going back to like how did they have why do they continuously have children if this is a problem? Again, the documentary was in 1968. When did contraceptives become widely available to women? Someone Google it for me. In the United States, when were contraceptives widely available?
In the United States, when were contraceptives widely available to women?
Here's what I found.
This is 2000.
In that it talked about how several of those people that were in poverty had like a late TV set,
Yep.
like just because they could enjoy something,
I mean,
but they couldn't afford to feed everybody.
yeah.
In 1978, the Supreme Court Kerry versus Population Services holds that states cannot constitutionally place any restrictions on the advertisement, sale, and distribution of contraceptives to individuals of any age. That's in 78.
So contraceptives like birth control kind of came out in the late 50s. So if you're figuring in 1968, that's, let's say, 10 years. Do you think that birth control had been widely adopted by then? No. Usually medications or things like that, what we call, remember, think back to diffusions class. Preventative measures are the hardest things for people to adopt, right? Preventative ideas. I mean, we still have countries around the world that people are working to try to get women to adopt birth control to decrease rise in population because of poverty, right? And it's 2020. So 10 years after the birth control pill comes out, it's not, especially in these rural areas, right? Not widely available. And then you have states that were saying, no, we are not going to, that is not natural. And so it prevented women from doing that. And so it's like that double-edged sword of you're like, why did they keep having kids? And it's like, and you hate to go this route, but what happens a lot in areas and populations where there is a lot of poverty? Do you think it was necessarily the woman's choice to have a lot of kids?
No.
I mean, that's a hard discussion, but not all the time, But then they have the responsibility of a mouth to feed after that happens. And so there's a lot of things connected to women's rights there. Let's say hypothetically that they did have access to birth control in 1968. How much is birth control?
Mine's $150 a month.
Yeah. It could be even more without any type of insurance coverage, right? That was and not promoting certain things, but that's a benefit of the Affordable Care Act, is that it made most birth controls completely covered for the sake of being able to make it more accessible to vulnerable populations for this exact reason. It can be really expensive, and so it's just sometimes a logistical issue.
Also, even if it is available, like in rural places, how easy is it for them to access a pharmacy to get it? And do they have transportation to the nearest pharmacy?
Well, also kind of going off of that, so I'm like fifth probably generation to go through my hometown, and so like everyone knows who I am, and so like when I got on birth control, my mom was so embarrassed for like the pharmacist to see that, and like I got on it this summer. I'm 21 years old. And
it's a stigma.
But it's because my mom did not want like someone to say something, which that goes against all rights.
You must be a 4-letter word, honey.
Exactly. So you're going off like rural America, like it's still not like it could be accessible, but it's not acceptable all the time.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's a good way to
Even
put it.
if it's for medical reasons and you're
Yeah.
like very young, they're still like,
Mine is to like help me like when I'm older, hopefully have kids, so
Yeah.
that like my body just doesn't completely ruin itself as I'm 21.
yeah.
So.
See, mine was medical. I started whenever I was 14 on medical, and now, like, I'm good, but, like, still I'm on it. But they've changed, because I used to be on a pill, but now I'm on the ring, and I'm $150, and that's with insurance.
Well, and one thing to think, especially about poverty areas, and a lot of times poverty areas are people of color. And, well, especially back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, those populations, specifically women, were targeted for special experimental birth control drugs. And those populations were targeted. A lot of women got hurt. So there's also a lot of distrust in those areas for using contraceptives and going to doctors because they don't get treated fairly. And they get put on these experimental things that a lot of women came out sterile. So also for these poverty-stricken things, there's, also, scary social stigmas that people are going to sell them things that are actually going to harm them. They might want kids in their 30s, but, they might be stereotypes.
I think that's what, I felt like the documentary did a really good job of tying like the issue of hunger to also the medical issues that are connected to hunger that we don't think about so much as a society. That like we do get concerned with like, well, goodness gracious, how much does medical stuff cost? And why is insurance so high? And why if I have to go to the ER, does it cost us this much money? Well, a lot of it is to this idea of poverty, that we have so many people who don't pay medical bills, that for those who do, it does increase prices there, because hospitals are businesses, they've got to cover the cost somehow. But then you wonder how many people go to the hospital for issues that they wouldn't even have if they had proper nutrition. What are some of y'all's thoughts on that, and like some of the connections you made watching the documentary?
Like in the section about the Navajo reservation, like a lot of those people's babies spent their whole lifetime in the hospital, and like that family wouldn't have to worry about that if the mom wasn't malnourished in the first place. And so it's like, even just through pregnancy, though, that would cut those bills if the mom had nutrition.
One thing I kept thinking about throughout it was, if the parents have to send their baby to the hospital and the baby gets out, how are they going to cover those bills? Like, that would just increase them even more in the debt. And so it's just like an endless cycle.
Debt after debt after debt, yeah. But yet, like the root of it, you go back to malnutrition, right? So it's like, do you feel like we've been tackling the wrong things, perhaps with communities in poverty?
Well, I noticed like in every situation, most of the people have like high starchy carb diets and no like protein or vegetables or things like that. And at the end, it said surplus commodities are free, but they aren't the right foods, and the other ones, food stamps, cost money, and then you might have some of the right foods, but then not everyone has access to one or both or either of those, and not everyone can afford the food stamps. So something is wrong there.
Yeah, when they were talking about food stamps, they said they could only buy a month's supply or a half month supply at a time, instead of only being able to buy like a week's supply, which they could actually afford.
Yep.
So it's like it's all set up so where they can't even afford them.
Yeah, that one woman, she couldn't even afford her food stamps because she had too many kids and it cost too much. So,
I don't know, if I was working for a food stamp office and someone came to me and they couldn't afford it, I'd be like, what do you mean you can't buy a week at a time? And I would like try and fix it. Like, you still need, I don't know, there's a lack of compassion.
I didn't realize that they had to, like, it started where they actually had to pay for the food stamps, I guess. Like, I don't know, like nowadays, they go off of your income, I guess. And I didn't, like, until then, I didn't realize that, like, they actually had to pay upfront the money.
And part of it's like application fees, processing fees, you know, things like that. It's still that way with a lot of government programs. Like if you're gonna apply for whatever, there's a $25 application fee, or, and that doesn't seem like a lot, but do y'all remember when y'all were like applying to colleges and taking the ACT and SAT, you're like, how much more money do you want from me? And what you didn't know is that was just a taste of college. Right?
But
But
then,
it's similar.
if we were to like, and maybe this is wrong, but if we were to take away those like $25, like what's gonna pay for the people that are passing out the food and the food stamps, like,
Yeah,
That's
it's gonna
just-
have some overhead costs.
yeah.
I didn't understand why food stamps were run by the Department of Agriculture back then, rather than the government or like some type of.
The Department of Agriculture still has it.
Still runs it.
It's government, but it's not like the Department of Agriculture should worry about like educating their farmers rather than having to deal out food stamps.
But it's food.
Yeah, so that's one of my questions. You know, they make this, definitely, it was at the end of it, and they talk about how food programs are ran through Department of Agriculture because it's part of the Farm Bill. And the thought is that, anything you think about it, the number of like departments and divisions we have in government right now wasn't the case in the 60s, wasn't the case. I mean, used to you had like a Department of Ed, Department of Ag, no, I don't know what else, but like we used to only just have like 3 departments. Well, we have more than that now. And so it fell under Department of Ag because it was related to food. And again, we think back, like, not only was SNAP or food stamps created to provide a way for people to afford food. The other side, and why it got stuck in the farm bill, is because it also gave a place for farmers to make sure that they would have people able to buy their food. So there was an issue of farmers producing food and there not being people who could afford it. And so there was a lot of food waste. And so the thought was, well, let's help the people who can't afford it so then farmers have an income. So it was kind of to benefit both parties. It wasn't just a consumer-driven program. Does that make sense? So that's how it got in Department of Ag. But the journalist said the Department of Ag protects farmers, not consumers. And asked the question, should food programs be moved to another federal department? What are y'all's thoughts? And I think they offered up like health and human services.
That's why I was thinking, like, why isn't it like a health organization that runs it, or, I don't remember, I forgot what it was.
My thought process would be that if you were to move it, those individuals are not going to understand why these consumers cannot have fresh produce like they think they should. So the Department of Agriculture understands how the dairy industry works. They understand how the cropping industry works. That's what they do. And this could be completely wrong. But I think that with the Department of Ag doing it, they have a better understanding of, unfortunately, what would last these people longer rather than what the people need, which is screwed up in a roundabout way as well, but that's just my opinion.
Going off of that, it's also they aren't gonna think about the farmers either. I feel like if they go through like the health service part, like they're not gonna think about the farmers at all. Cause I mean, it does go back to the farmers because they're producing this. So I think it would affect in long-term operations.
I understand that it helps the farmers. I just think they need some help on the other side of dispersing those food stamps. The only thing, like there should be some type of like financial assistance or financial people that know like about buying food, and just something on that side of it to help on that. But
And I think they do. I think it's just the government. I think it's the government that's not allowing that.
So I think, to look at an example of like what, we're playing hypotheticals here. So like what would it look like to move SNAP out of Farm Bill budget and out of the USDA and move it into another department? Let's look at extension. So extension at most land grants, they serve the public, and we tend to think of extension as only related to colleges of ag, but other colleges are a part of extension services. So like here at Oklahoma State, we have the Division of Ag, we have extension in agriculture, but then we also have extension in the College of Human Sciences. And so here's kind of, I guess, one of the separations that I see is that, do we have a nutrition program that's focused on human food nutrition in the College of Ag? Where does that lie? HDFS, right? Do we have extension agents that focus on nutrition programs in the state? Yeah. Anybody ever seen disconnect between nutrition programs and agriculture programs? What are some of those disconnects? I'll tell you one of my biggest ones. Nutritionists are going to promote organic food.
That's what I was gonna say, like, during my internship, I worked with, because I was an extension intern in Oklahoma County, so like, I worked with the family and consumer sciences, and I also worked with the 4-H and the ag educators, so it's like, I saw both sides of it, and obviously, like, the ag educators know, like, the intention of an organic farming and the intention of GMOs, where so many of the, consumer science workshops we had, like, oh, organic this, and that, I just feel like that's something that makes people perceive ag as wrong. And so then it's like, you're not getting the nutrition because you're opposing the cheaper option because you're told that it's bad, but in turn, it's just as healthy for you and it's just as nutritious for you just because the stigma is bad.
So we end up with a lack of education on both sides. I had a friend in college that she was going to, and she's now a registered dietitian. So her and I would always have these conversations. I was the Aggie and she was the nutritionist, right? Human Sciences, College of Ag. And so very like pro-organic, all this stuff because of what her nutrition classes taught her. But then we could talk about, and I could share with her that information, she'd realize, oh, it doesn't really matter. On my end, I didn't know a whole heck of a lot about human nutrition. Do y'all learn about it? We learned a lot about animal nutrition.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I've taken
Some
a
of it
nutrition
does.
class, but not through a college of ag.
Yeah.
I live, go ahead.
No.
I live with two like nutrition basically majors, and they're, one of them only shops at Sprouts, like only shops at Sprouts. And so like, like she's questioned me on like why I get 2% milk and not almond milk or oat milk or something of that nature,
Because
or.
my son says cow milk's better than nut milk. That's
Yeah.
what I'm saying.
And so, but it's literally like, and she's somebody that is so argumentative that
Uh-huh.
I could tell her this cow was black and she's gonna tell me it's white. So, and it's
Sounds like a
because.
fun roommate.
Yeah, she's a great time.
So I'm guessing you're not gonna sign the lease again with her?
No, she's one of my best friends.
Oh, okay.
And she will be in my wedding, but like, she is somebody who's like taken those classes and has like, refuses to see the other side.
Mhm.
And so I think that's where some like, what have you been saying? Disconnect. I wanted to say reconnect and I knew that was wrong. But I think that's where a lot of the disconnect is, like you said, because like I'm in the College of Ag and she's in whatever the hell her college is. And there's just no connect there. She has no desire to learn and I don't have any desire to learn from her because she refuses to hear anything that I have to say.
Yeah, yeah.
And then my question is why doesn't the College of Ag pair up with the nutrition, you know what I mean, or like offer us classes so we can educate?
What do y'all think?
I think the colleges don't want to work together. Like, in any way. Like, I work in Spears, which obviously not a Spears student, but my boss and I were talking about it one day, and he's like, I don't understand why ag business students don't take business classes, but like, Spears is funded by different people than the Ferguson College of Ag, so why would we want to share what we have to teach with somebody else? Which is horrible, but I think it's the truth.
Money is the root of all evil.
Like, I really think that's where it comes from, is
I
not
can see
wanting
that.
to work together.
Like education, health, and aviation is forming with human sciences, mostly because education didn't have any money. But when I was still elementary ed, they had us take health classes. And first it was only because it was like the whole college, but then it was like, oh, when you're a teacher, you're gonna need to know what your students are eating and what's gonna like make them feel better throughout. I'm like, why don't we just do this in general? Like what's gonna fuel our bodies? Because we're gonna have kids one day and we're gonna want to help them out. But ultimately you're just trying to help kids in school. I was like, this is so smart. Like, why doesn't anybody else think this way?
Can we take
Well,
it?
and you bring up a good point with like, why don't we just want to learn about nutrition for ourselves as a
Yeah.
whole, right? One of the things I was going to bring up in a food policy book, if you ever need some good reading, that said, you know, today, again, kind of going from this 1968 documentary today, that now in the United States, our top problem isn't so much linked to undernutrition. We can definitely say there's lack of. It's actually linked to obesity. And they touch a little bit on it in 1968, and you kind of wonder, like, did they have a crystal ball at what was, like, going to happen?
Yeah.
But, I mean, how could learning about human nutrition help us just generally be more healthy?
I mean, like almost every one of those 4 areas, the problem was that they had more access to starchy foods, but no other nutrition.
And
And
fats.
so, what?
And fats.
Yeah. And so it's not like they're getting actual nutrition, but they're getting the stuff that's going to make them gain weight and going to make them be overweight.
not even fulfilling their nutrients either. It's a filler. Like, I think of it, it literally just fills them up and then they get nothing from it.
Yeah.
Kind of like the other documentary we watched, the one right before this. The kids were obese, but they were still hungry because whatever they were eating filled them up for like a half an hour, and then they were hungry again, so then they ate more potato chips or whatever.
I also think people take more time in shaming those people rather than helping them. Like, I remember being a child, or like, I guess I was a kid, and like my parents shaming me because I wanted something to eat. But like, there was nothing else, and I was hungry, so I was going to eat the potato chips.
Yeah.
And by no means like was it like a poverty level, but it's because like people would rather just like shame you and think that like, oh well, maybe this will get in their head and they're just not gonna want to do that. Or does that make sense to you?
Yeah, totally another shift creep reference. You know, he's eating and he's like, oh, sorry, I was shame eating. What is that? We don't have enough time to discuss that.
Yeah.
I feel that on all levels.
Well, and I feel like that's part of why, like, poverty but also obesity are like generational things, is because you don't know how to get past that. Like, my roommate and I talk about this a lot because she's like, I feel like I don't know how to eat healthy and I don't know how to spend my money wisely because my parents don't do it. And so if we're not, like, yes, obviously we want adults to be educated too, but if children aren't knowing about it, by the time that they're adults, it's going to be harder for them to change that mindset and know what needs to be. Which, like, obviously a kid's not the one most of the time buying their own food. But if they know, they can, you know, instead of asking their parents for cookies at the store, they could ask for fruit or,
Which, not this past, the one before, the table one. The lunch late, and I don't even think she was a lunch lady, but
She was
the
a
older.
third grade teacher.
Yeah,
Like,
who
can't
came in,
lie.
like, taught and was like, let's try this, like, and then half the kids loved it, and, I mean,
I hate honeydew, and all them kids were like eating it up, and I was like,
I love honeydew.
I love
I
honeydew.
love it. I'll eat, I just slice it in half and eat the whole thing. I love honeydew.
But see, and I think that's
it
just,
tastes to me.
but the kids automatically see fruit, and like, most of them were like, ew, that's gonna be disgusting, like,
Yeah.
and I think that's the stereotype that we give. They're like, here, even like on field trips, I remember they would give you the option of like potato chips or an apple, and like so many kids would choose
They
the
still do,
potato chips.
and I still choose the chips.
And like,
Same.
and I think it was the way that I was raised, like I was told to choose the apple, like my mom, and I think it's because like, we were pretty much health nuts, like we ate tree bark, I felt like, those mornings. But like, that's what I was taught, like I was taught not to like potato chips. And so like for the longest time, like I would look at kids who ate potato chips and be like, oh my god, that's so gross. You know, like, so I do think it's how we're raised.
I also think that like, I am a kid that was stubborn as hell. And so like my mom shaming me because I wasn't eating the apple made me want to eat the whole entire bag of chips.
Yeah.
And so like, and maybe that's just like a me, like internal thing, but like, you like this, I don't want this to come derogatory, but like you're on your field trips and your best friend's eating potato chips and you're like, that's disgusting.
Yeah.
When in reality, like that's what she knows.
Yeah.
And like she would like feel judged, and then like, what is she supposed to do there? You know what I mean?
It's not her fault, yeah, looking back,
Yeah.
and then like, I would feel guilty, like, we had vending machines and like, I would go in between classes and like, go get a candy bar, but I would have to feel like nobody could see me eat it, you know what I'm saying? So like, even like the healthiest person still like, they feel judged.
Yeah. Well, I like what y'all point out about that generational idea of like understanding what nutrition is. You know, that's one of the big pushes for having school gardens at elementary schools, is that, you know, kids can see how to grow it and learn how to cook it. They're gonna be more likely to eat it. Like, we know that, the research shows us that. And yet, have we really invested a whole lot in that?
No, all we do is put the posters up that tell you what you should put on your plate.
And I mean, and I'm not docking like ag in the classroom. I think ag in the classroom is fantastic, and they're at least trying to do something.
Yeah.
But again, we leave a lot of the onus to these elementary school teachers to then be the ones bringing it to class. Like, what, I mean, Georgia actually is the first state that they are now implementing elementary school agriculture curriculum. Like, they are going to have elementary school ag teachers.
I would love that.
That's just really, really
Oh, that would be
cool.
so fun.
It's gonna take a couple years for it to get going, but it has been approved. University of Georgia, College of Ag is working, you know, like, it's gonna be really cool. And I think
Less
that's gonna
algebra.
happen.
But then
Huh?
like,
Less
Less
algebra.
algebra, more
my
agriculture.
other concerns too, so I know like a lot of schools are cutting out the agriculture, like in their schools, so like who's gonna fund this going into elementary if we're already having issues in middle and high school?
That's a really good point. So again, what causes people to cut programs?
Money.
Where does money for education come from? State, where does that money from the state come from? Taxes. So we've just got to think about that. I'm not telling y'all should always vote for taxes increase, but you do have to think about where stuff is going. And if we expect there to be a public good that's provided to us,
Yeah.
it's got to be funded somewhere. Roads are the same way. Not gonna lie, Oklahoma has the worst roads of any state I've ever lived in, and I'm like, please tax me 2 more cents so that I don't hit another pothole. Like, I would be okay with that.
You should go to New Mexico.
That-
Their roads suck too. And they got high taxes, so I don't know.
There it is.
But no, it's interesting, and even just this idea of like, what are kids taught to eat? I did try not to be a health nut with Wilt, but my family, we grew up eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, so it's just been very natural to like cook that for him, and he is that weird child that if I put vegetables and a piece of pizza on his plate, he eats the vegetables first, picks off the topping of the pizza, and sometimes he eats the bread part of it. I have no idea, like, this kid's probably gonna love starches, but I do think it's like, but I say all that, and that like, Chad, when him and I got married, he didn't grow up eating very healthy, just genetically happens to be a beanpole. He had never had a sweet potato before.
But I'm allergic to them too.
Oh, okay, okay.
But I hated them before I knew.
I mean, there have been he had never had okra, squash or zucchini. There's so many vegetables that just in our years of being married, he's finally like come accustomed to that he never like green beans and corn was like practically the only, never had butter beans, y'all? What?
But my
Lima
question
beans,
is
butter
like,
beans? Oh, I hate taking them home.
so
Are you
like
allergic?
even at that age, how do you get him to eat that? Do you see what I'm saying? Like even like at our age, we're starting to worry about our nutrition and diet. Like how do we change our mental sense of it? You know what I'm saying? Because like when my boyfriend came, like he does not eat healthy, and I'm over here like pre-measured out everything, like. And he's like, I'll just go to Buffalo Wild Wings and get some chicken. Like, and I'm over here like, no.
I don't know, what are y'all's thoughts on that? Like, how do we educate, you know, it's easy to kind of focus in on how to educate children, right? Because they're like moldable. How do we educate adults to kind of stop that generational cycle of poor nutrition?
I think this kind of goes back to Briar's comment, like, you can't help someone that doesn't want to be helped, I guess. Like, I like my stepdad, God love him, but he is like meat and potatoes. And it's like my mom makes squash and zucchini. So what the hell is this? I don't want to eat this.
It's literally my stepdad too.
And my mom is trying, but my stepdad just is like, this isn't what I want.
Same.
So he eats what he wants and goes to the pantry and finds something else.
Same. Literally. We had the same stepfather.
I think for adults, a big shift is like eating for hunger versus eating to fuel your body. And I think at least like the first time I think an adult witnesses, like if you change your diet and like you feel that energy or you feel your body finally not having that icky feeling all around your organs, like all around here, I feel like that's like almost transformative for an adult. It's like, oh, what I eat does affect this body that I operate and move around all day, and I can make it better through what I eat. Like what I eat translates to my body. But everybody's body is different. So like what your body's calling for you to eat, like well, you know, you're pregnant, you have cravings, and I'm sure your doctor has told you that, like, what you're craving is like your body saying that you need some
It's
other
often
vitamin
the
or nutrient.
deficiency of a vitamin or a mineral.
Yeah, like my mama, she always like chewing ice just because she needed iron.
Oh, yeah, I've got a
Yeah.
really big iron deficiency, and my teeth are jank, because I eat ice all the time.
Chocolate is a sign of magnesium and zinc.
I mean,
That.
on what you were saying, like, that's kind of how I've been lately. I just started intermittent fasting last month, and like, I just have thought about like, I need to stop thinking about how food tastes and more what it's gonna do for my body. And also, I don't know why I had this thought, like a few months ago, I was just thinking like, you only get one body. You can't really, can't just get a new one if you treat it bad. So.
You can, you just gotta have a lot of money.
How are you gonna get a new body? Like, there's things you can replace if you mess it up, but like, you only have one body.
Right.
So,
I think it has to go along with a lot of experience. Like in high school, I didn't realize how much just drinking water compared to drinking pop made a difference. Like my freshman and sophomore year, I didn't really feel that good. But my junior and senior year, like I just drank nothing but water and ate good like protein and good meals. So it just I felt so much better. So I started realizing the difference.
Yeah. I think one of the things, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say that, like, just with adults eating healthier food, I think learning how to prepare it the right way is a big thing, because like sweet potatoes and broccoli and, what is something weird, like
Spaghetti squash.
butternut squash.
Oh, yes.
Squash, like,
Yes.
those things can taste very differently depending on how you prepare it. And I think like, if I made somebody sweet potato fries that thought they didn't like sweet potatoes, they might actually kick your
Have you
ass.
tried
You know what I
the tater
mean?
tots? Or were they like tots? The sweet potato, oh. Mm.
So I think like just like if you could just prepare something for someone and just say, hey, try it, or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I think
I
that
think
one of
that's-
the, oh, go ahead.
I think that's also a big thing in schools. Like, when I was younger, like, my parents fed me vegetables and everything. But, like, our cafeteria, one of the ladies, like, made all of our fruits and vegetables, well, grew all the fruits and vegetables that we ate. But they were prepared so badly that, like, I would not touch carrots or zucchini or strawberries, like super simple things, just because they were prepared so bad. And I just had a really bad relationship with fruits and vegetables for so long because of how they were prepared.
School lunches are so hard because they have to prepare a mass amount of like,
Yeah.
so what do? Like beans and canned green beans.
That, and there's a
You know.
one of the cooking shows just is about to have a challenge of like the chefs have to cook off
Oh,
of
yeah.
a school. I don't know.
I saw that.
Has it already aired?
I don't know if it's already aired, but I
But,
think
like,
I saw
I
a
wanna
commercial
watch
or
that
something.
Is it
one.
Iron Chef that's soon?
It might be.
It might, yeah.
Like, they have to
Yeah.
follow the
Budget.
guidelines that
And they
school
would-
cafeterias have to follow.
And the budget.
Yeah, and the girl was like, I had to put so much sugar in there to make up for like, and I was like, oh, like she said the cups of sugar, and I like sat there and I was like, oh my god.
Well, and that's another thing too, to talk about like why do we eat, even if it appears we're eating healthy, then why are we having such an obesity problem? There was actually some guidelines that came out last week, and there's been a lot of talk about it for several years because internationally, other countries have started changing their dietary guidelines to suggest that like on average, we should only have, let's say 10 to 15 teaspoons of sugar a day. Like that's kind of, our body doesn't need that sugar. Our body, again, from a nutrition standpoint, uses sugar for immediate energy, and we're not active enough anymore to really need more than that every day. We need more sustaining energy from protein and complex carbs and stuff like that. And so other countries have changed their dietary guidelines. Shocker, have we? No. Anybody? Kylie, your Dr. Pepper there. How many grams of sugar in it? I didn't mean teaspoons, so we should have 10 to 15 grams of sugar a day. How many is in a Dr. Pepper?
Sugar, 65.
Right? So there was something in the newspaper last week that talked about, for the first time, U.S. dietary guidelines are actually starting to really take a look at changing sugar recommendations. And and I think I've shared with this with y'all before, if you go to the grocery store and you start really looking at labels, the things that have added sugar in it are crazy. And they've shown that sugar hits your brain and causes the same chemical reactions that drugs do. So it's an addiction. It really
I
is.
have a hard time quitting, like drinking soda.
Yeah. I mean, when I stopped eating sugar for 1.5 years, it was like going in a withdrawal for a good 2 weeks. Headaches, migraines, feeling nauseous, and then it was like you come out of the fog and you're off. Is that just what Susie said? That idea of like, I didn't know I could finally feel this good, you know, that kind of thing. And now I eat way too much sugar. What were you gonna add to that, Cody?
But I still drink them anyways.
Why?
Because if I don't have any type of caffeine, I'm cranky and I go crazy.
But see, I used to be that way, and I used to drink Dr. Pepper. Like, in my junior college, I would buy Dr. Pepper by the case. Like, Dollar General, we had a small little Dollar General, and like 4 cases, be gone by like Friday. But I mean, like, if you think about, that's all we drank. Like, wake up, that was what we had. We didn't have coffee. Like, it was Dr. Pepper. Like, that's all my dorm room girls drank. Like, that was our life. And whenever I, like, realized, like, that was part of my issue, first off, I had, like, 2 weeks of, like, nobody could touch me, look at me, like, sit by me, nothing. Like, it was bad. But, like, quitting now and looking back at it, I realized, A, how bloated I was, and, like, how, like, truthfully, like, you would drink it, you get, like, that sugar rush, and then afterwards you're like, like, there's nothing there. Yeah. So, I don't know, and then just, like, starting to, like, run and work out again, like, realizing, like, one day I had a Dr. Pepper, and I, like, went to go run, and I felt so horrible. Like, anymore, I feel horrible after. I don't get that, like, goodness from it, I guess.
How do we help people change eating habits without going down that route of shaming? Food shame is a bad thing.
I think balance is really good. When you're trying to change your diet or something, if you just go one extreme, then it's like the same thing, because as soon as you have a bite of a crunch, I don't know, a candy bar, you just like want so much candy bars or donuts or whatever.
I think go ahead. I was just gonna say, like, you can just show them that you can have really good food. You can make your favorite food in the world. There's just a few adjustments you can do to make it healthy, or at least show them, like, you know, if you have like I have a major sweet tooth. I get it from my father. It will not stop ever. I can literally eat chocolate cake and go and eat like a whole Reese's cup. Like, it won't stop. So like, I do my thing where like 2 days a week I get to have sweets. So like, I make it sure that I'm not depriving myself, but I still get to have that little sweet here. And just like, you know, it's not all or nothing. You don't have to like rid yourself of all the good stuff, but just be like, hey, you know, you can have all of this delicious food and still have what you have. You just can't just make the good stuff everything that you have, you know.
So I don't know if any of y'all's high schools did this, or if it's even still a thing, but like, I remember in my high school when they got rid of the vending machines. Like, that was, any of y'all's schools do that?
When they what? Did you
Got
say?
rid of vending machines?
Oh, I don't know, it probably still has them.
Or they didn't get rid of ours, they just put like baked chips in it, and then everyone just.
There was like an
ran.
obvious change the next day. It went from like Coke to like Dasani waters, and then like regular Lay's chips to all the baked kinds. And it was even like a visual change. It was all bright colors, then it was like all neutral toned overnight.
Did any of y'all, like, here on campus, when you see the whole like blue and orange, does that make you choose that out of the
I'm not
vending
gonna lie,
machine?
sometimes it does. I'm like,
Really?
you know what? You're right, vending machine. I should pick that one instead.
We'll be good today.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things, and again, thinking back to some of our beginning conversations, we talked about how, again, people who are on food programs, we see them go to the grocery store, and perhaps we think that they're not choosing the most healthy food. And we talked about how, well, we shouldn't let them be able to use their SNAP benefits to purchase chips or whatever. Should students on campus be able to use their meal plan dollars to buy junk food?
They should have the freedom to buy whatever they want to buy. So, like,
Cause isn't your meal plans, don't you guys pay for your meal plans, like,
Through loans.
your money, yeah.
Well, I am.
That are government funded, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, technically, isn't that your money?
Because you're gonna be paying it back at some point.
Huh?
You're gonna be paying it at some point.
For some people. But you know, if we're wanting people to be healthier, wouldn't just an option be for the university not to even stock that kind of stuff on campus? What are y'all's thoughts on that?
Or just less.
But they're focused on making money, and if students can get it somewhere else rather than here, they're gonna go get it somewhere else.
I don't know, kind of like you were just saying, and I think, cause I have a dietitian and stuff, and she said exactly like, you can have the candy, you can have that piece of chocolate cake, but if you are gonna have a piece of chocolate cake, it's the proportion size, like, and I think that's helped me a lot, realize like, I can still go and have like, go out to eat and like, have a sweet with the girls, or like stop and get ice cream or something, like, that is okay, but like, maybe not get the extra large, you know what I'm saying? So like, I think it's just educating, like, it's okay to have the sweet. Don't think that, because she was like, you know, that's what a lot of people, they think about going on a diet, and it's cutting completely all of that out, and it's not, you're gonna struggle more, because you're gonna want that, and then once you start, you're gonna want all of it again, and it's gonna set you back. So like, have the sweet, just have it in proportion control.
Right. Well, and it goes back to that idea like Briar said, like, shouldn't people just have the choice? You know, and that's what I think makes hunger such a hard problem to solve, is that we don't want to take away people's free will and their choice. Because again, that is like a virtue and a value of ours, right? And so then we've got to figure out, how do we motivate people then to make different decisions? Because again, and we've talked about this, we vote with our dollar. How we choose to spend our money as consumers is going to drive what's produced, what's processed, what's put out on the grocery store shelf, right? And so if we want more healthy foods, then we've got to start buying more healthy foods. Like we have to see that trickle down. And it is really, really hard to change people's behaviors. That's one of the reasons why y'all do have to take the fusions of innovation, is because a lot of what we do in a lot of areas of agriculture, food, any of that is trying to influence people's behavior. And it's a hard thing to do.
Do you think when people try to influence others, they wind up shaming them?
Oh, tell me more where that question comes from.
My personal opinion, like, when the whole, like, conversation about, like, her Dr. Pepper, like, it ate me alive, because, like, that was her personal choice. And so it bothered me to like hear that, because like I know, like, I've been there, like, that's not a good feeling.
Right.
And so like we were trying to like have an educated conversation, but in reality, like, it was almost shameful. I'm not trying to step on your toes by any means, but like
yeah, it's an uncomfortable conversation.
it is. And so like, I just think people forget that there's a time and a place to like have those uncomfortable conversations. And like in a class with, I don't know how many, 12 of us, like, it's not always the right place.
Yeah. Like, so how do we do that?
I think we let people live their lives.
Okay.
I think that's a big deal for me. Like, everyone's gonna do what they want to at the end of the day, and like how you live your life, awesome. You're running every day, you're eating healthy, awesome. Oh, you're having a Dr. Pepper and ice cream for dinner? How fun is that? If that makes you happy, freaking do it. If you're doing intermittent fasting, if you're trying to better yourself for a little bit, but then going to get Whataburger, like, just do what makes you happy, because it's your life, it's no one else's.
So playing devil's advocate to that though, and kind of going back to some of the things we've talked about, the issues with hunger, and it not just being a hunger issue, but being connected to rising medical costs, to all these, that like a person's individual decision and choice doesn't just affect them, does it? What do y'all think? So,
but is it our business?
Do you think we could educate like kids and like if people might want to be educated or like if you're not directly saying like this is what you need to do, but if you're just educating them on what is like gonna be really good.
Yeah, and I think like that's really important too, but like my mom like is a great mom and she did not start educating herself on food until like 2 years ago. And so it's all on like when somebody wants to do it. Like my dad has lived this life for 55 years, started Weight Watchers 6 months ago, then his life has changed. But that's because it's like what he was ready to do. And like I can only speak from my own personal opinions, but like what Bailey said, like we are not going to make anybody change unless they want to, unfortunately, or that's how my life has been growing up.
I agree with her. That's why I've been sitting here the whole time. Like, I didn't want to sound harsh or anything. We talk about educating. You can only educate so much because at the end of the day, it is their choice. So I don't know if, like, we say, oh, all the funding to going to educate. I don't know if it should be put somewhere else. Like, I don't know. Like, we spend
There should be a balance between educating and giving people the right food, helping them get not just starches and fats.
Yeah, that's what my thing is. We put more funding towards like from being able to provide that food versus
Just giving them the education.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
That one woman in the documentary, she was like wanting to have kids, but she couldn't be, and her doctor was telling her like, you gotta eat better than this, but she couldn't afford it. That just made me feel bad for her, like she couldn't afford better food, and she knew that's what she needed to do, but she couldn't.
Right. Well, and that kind of ties in too about this idea of like education's good, but then there are some tangible other things we can do to help with the problem if it's access to it, if it's not having money for it. And they talked a lot throughout about surplus commodities. And we still kind of do this in multiple ways. And actually sometimes we function this, we may not do it as overtly as we used to do it in the 60s as far as like going and dropping off surplus commodities in communities. We may just now donate them to food banks, right? They talked about like the over supply of peanut butter, right? And so surplus commodities, it's dumping excess rather than providing essentials. What were some, I mean, did y'all think at all about that? About like, is that helping at all? Because we know that surplus commodities are only meeting 20% when we say caloric needs, not just calories that people should have, but again, that nutrition, that sense of proteins and vitamins and minerals and things that are really important to our bodies. It only provides 20% of that.
I think is it helping at all? Yes. But is it helping a lot?
And then my thing was, is like, they said towards the end, like, yeah, they have all these commodities, but like, there was, what, 20,000 pigs that were killed?
Yeah.
Just to be killed?
Yeah.
So why are we not giving them the other commodities, like, that help, like, the better, more protein, nutritionist commodities?
Who's gonna pay for that?
But they're shooting them. They're already killing
Like, who's
them.
gonna pay to process them and to give them to those families in need? Like, it all comes back to like taxation and money.
Most of those families could probably butcher them themselves.
Yeah, but.
But how are we gonna get the pigs to them?
It's also liability.
Like, there's so many great ideas and like things that like are so close to like we think we could do, and then we're like, shit, like there's something else.
Yeah. Complexity, man, it's rough, right? And I think that's what's gonna make like our supply chain conversation in November really interesting. It's just looking more at this, like where are some of these issues in our current supply chain causing us to make it harder to do some of these things. You know, and I hate going back to this idea of taxes because everybody has different views and I don't know what the right answer is on a lot of it. But again, it's that view of, is this a person's problem or is it our problem? And even too, then talking about a place at the table, you know, we have as a country for 20, 30 years now said it's their problem. So we have reduced taxes and funding to where we're not, you know, we're relying more on these private and nonprofit organizations to meet hunger and food security needs, and it's not working. What are some of those challenges with viewing this more collectively and saying it is our problem and it's not their problem? Because we all kind of agreed at the beginning, we didn't like what that one politician said. What do we do? How can we shift that culture, or should we shift that culture?
You just get the top 1% to get behind it. That's all it would take.
Explain a little bit more about that.
We have billionaires that literally you can't spend $1 billion in a year. Like, I mean, yeah, you could, but you can't do that. Like, why do they collect the wealth? It just makes no sense to me why there's billionaires.
And maybe it's not limiting people being able to be billionaires, but perhaps maybe there shouldn't. I mean, I listened to something the other day that talked about the CEO of Amazon, or Amazon as a company paid $0 in taxes, even though they bring in billions of dollars every year. Just imagine if they, what is 5% tax rate on $1 billion? Me either, so I'm waiting on Karen, and I'm assuming that's what she's doing.
Well, to put that number in more perspective.
5 million.
Yeah.
$5 million.
That should have been
Oh,
easy
I'm
math,
never gonna
sorry.
see that either.
That's more money than what we put towards some programs, right? Like, I don't know. I don't know. I know that there's an argument on the other side too, but I don't go that way. Sometimes it's just like, man, I don't know.
Yeah, but, so, I struggle with this, because I'm like, capitalism, I want my money that I work for. And sometimes billionaires are shady, we know that, but it's still their money, so, because they have excess, we're wanting to take away. But technically, I mean, my family has more than we need, so does that mean we just take from everyone that has excess, and we just?
I think the issue is with like what he's referring to, like top 1%. It's not that they were wanting to take more from them than what we take from other people. It's that they tend to operate in ways to where they're not paying taxes, period. You
Just
know,
want everyone to pay
and
their fair share.
So there is a loss of tax revenue as a result of some of those policies. That, you know, it's like, would that help? I mean, just be like a tiny little cushion to some of this. I don't know.
That goes into back to my thing of our society is set up for the rich to stay rich and the poor to stay poor.
And when you think about, like, you know, you say, like, you don't want your family's excess to be taken away. Nobody wants to live in a society where you have a little bit more and it's going to be taken away from you. But when you operate in a society that gives you the momentum and the power to become so wealthy that you and your family can never spend that money reasonably in their entire lifetimes, why not pay your fair share to the system that made it possible for you to have so much excess wealth? You know, pay back into the society that even makes that possible. You know, America's very attractive to people that want to make a lot of money. They're very good at making a lot of money, but they're not so good at paying back our society for making that much money. So it's also that too, you know.
And it is interesting because one of the reasons we are at such a level of prosperity is because we have something, we call it free education, but it's education free. No. Paid through taxes, right? And so there's almost, again, it's kind of up in that cycle of like, we thought it was so important for everyone to have education because we saw the benefit it would provide to society. So we paid communally into this idea of providing a free service. But now we're like, well, let's not fund it anymore. And now we're starting to see repercussions of that and lack of access and a less educated population and not being able to compete as well with other countries when it comes to innovation and technology. You know, there are, again, it's just that balance. Like, how in the world do we shift a culture, or should we shift a culture to say hunger isn't an individual issue? Hunger affects all of us, and it may not affect us by being hungry today, but it's going to affect our pocketbook later down the road with higher healthcare costs, what have you. I mean, how do we have this conversation, or should it even be a conversation that we have as a society?
I don't know, but I think like our generation is really good about, I mean, it's from where I'm from, and like we had to like go to the soup kitchen and like donate, you know, like we had food drives to help So like I automatically like try to help now. Does that make sense? Like I was educated to help back then, so now I still try to.
So is supporting soup kitchens and food banks gonna be the way to solve the hunger problem? Why not? Huh?
Temporarily.
Temporarily.
But you know, usually you see help at food banks and soup kitchens only during Thanksgiving and Christmas when we're willing to help. You don't see it during, you know, February or during summer and.
The non-holiday.
Yeah, and you don't, and a lot of these places aren't like willing to be open only when it's cold outside. So then you have people dying of heat strokes in the summer and nobody willing to help them. So like it's not helpful.
So I think two big takeaways from this documentary. I have really enjoyed y'all's conversation today. I do apologize if anything that I said came off as shameful or made you feel shame about what you eat. I'm probably the last person that should do that because I 100% shame eat every day. But I do genuinely apologize for that. Again, big takeaways is for us to see, you know, at the very beginning of the film, they said poverty is bearable, but man can't live without food. Poor people are alive because they eat, but they're malnourished because of what they eat. And food shouldn't be a need, it should be a right. I think those are, you know, those are some of those key statements that really started to drive just a bigger focus on hunger in our country after this documentary came out. And it is crazy to think that it's 42 years later and we're still having these conversations. And again, a little bit different. The malnourishment isn't as much. We have bigger issues on the other side with things like obesity, but it's still malnourishment as far as our bodies not getting nutrients. And so I think something that I hope we can think of is that instead of viewing the production of food and nutrition as two separate things, maybe something we can champion is how those things need to go together. When it comes to education, when it comes to access to information, for all of us to say, okay, I'm not just going to learn about the production of food, I'm going to take time to learn about what food is actually best for bodies and go that route. And on the other hand, the people who know about that to say, well, let me learn about how it's produced. And so how can we create more holistic programs and information so that when people do get to the point that they want to make these choices, they have better, well-rounded information. I think that'd be huge. For Thursday, make sure that you go into Canvas and you read the PDF, that's the Food Policy Chapter 10, and there's a worksheet that goes along with it just to make sure you get some key concepts. Bring that worksheet to, well, do y'all want to meet in person on Thursday or do you want to meet virtually?
I'm good with in person.
In person? Okay, so bring it to class with you. Susie's awesome and she printed out a copy of it. So bring your responses with you to class. This is going to be a little bit different take. So, you know, we've been talking about the issues of hunger and of food insecurity. This is going to be a little bit more on the things like government policies and the economics behind it. So this is going to give us some more of that objective data. And then lastly, take care of yourself and your friends. Check in on the people close to you. Make sure they're doing all right and make sure they know that they matter to you. And if you don't feel like you matter, come talk to me. You'll matter to me. So take care of yourself. Physically, mentally, everything.
I have a question. If, for the snack project, if we buy a pound of ground beef, can we make spaghetti and then a hamburger the other night?
Yeah, as long as you're not like making these things up.
Okay.
How many are we cooking for?
Just yourself.
Okay.